Hello, everybody. This is Ms. Rector. We're going to go through the first PowerPoint lecture on Chapter 1, Observation Skills. So, you should have already taken most of the notes from the book as far as definitions. So, this is just a chance for us to talk about things. So, let's go on through here. So, there's a brief synopsis of things we're going to learn today. So, we're going to define observation, look at examples that influence eyewitness accounts, compare eyewitness reliability, relate observation skills to forensic science, define forensic science. Okay, so here's all the vocab you should already have written in your notes, so I'm not going to spend time worrying about that. Excuse me. What is forensic science? So basically, forensic science is taking evidence and facts that have to do with criminal cases or civil cases and applying it to the legal system. So it uses all branches of science. Unlike the CSI shows, there's not like one forensic scientist that does everything. There's, different people that specialize in different things. So there's chemistry, biology, physics, geology, all of those things are going to be used by forensic scientists. Sorry, trying to silence my phone there. So, a forensic examiner must be able to find and identify evidence, document it, that is extremely important, and then interpret it. So, what does it mean? What significance does it have? Documentation is key. If you don't document it, it did not happen. You didn't find it. That piece didn't exist. So, first, let's talk a little bit about observation. When we observe things, we use our senses to observe the world around us, but sometimes our brain kind of tricks us. So, if you look at these two pictures here, you can see maybe when you first looked here, did you see a woman and a man? Or did you see this person holding a pot on their head and this person playing a guitar? Or did you see like this chalice in the middle? So, depending on what you're focusing on, you might see different things. Same with this over here. If you were to take your hands and cover up the A and the C, this looks like a 13 because all you see is 12 and 14. This seems like 13 is what it should be. But if you cover up the 12 and the 14 and you see it between the A and the C, it looks like a B. And it's not that this is changing, it's just the context clues around it are changing. So it's going to make your brain see it differently. So, speaking of your brain, we could go on and on and on about your brain, but this class doesn't focus on that very much. Now, we obviously need to know a little bit about it, but if you want to take psychology, you can learn much more about it. Psychology is always fun anyway. All kinds of crazy stuff you get to learn in there. But here, we're not going to learn about all the different parts and blah, 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 everything, but we're going to get to know the basics of it, especially for this because you need to know the basics of how your brain works, how memories are formed, to talk about eyewitnesses and even you as an investigator. So, first, your brain is taking in all your sensory. So this is, what's the temperature in the room like? Is there some air movement? Do I feel a breeze coming in from a window? Am I sitting under the air conditioner? Most of these things your brain takes in, says, oh, that's not important, forgets it. Occasionally, the important stuff gets transferred to your short-term memory. So if for some reason it becomes important that the temperature of the room and the breeze blowing, then it's going to move to your short-term memory. And if you rehearse it, you're going to remember it even more. And it might even get transferred into your long-term memory. So when you are in a class, your teacher's up there talking, a lot of it might just get forgotten right away. But some of it hopefully is going to move to your short-term memory. You're going to rehearse it by writing it down in your notes. You're going to rehearse it again when you go do some problems for homework or something, or try to do it in a lab. All that is hopefully going to move it to your long-term memory where now you've learned it, it's in your brain, and you can retrieve it later on. So the path to get from here to here, takes some effort. You have to focus on things, rehearse them before they go over to here. Now, some things can interrupt this process. So, one thing I'm going to talk about just briefly is when we talk about alcohol. And this comes in not just for, as you guys are getting ready to go off to college and, oh, you might be tempted to, go to a party and drink a lot of alcohol. You need to know what it's going to do to your brain. Also, as a forensics investigator. So, what happens when you drink alcohol? If you get above a certain limit, the alcohol will pass the blood brain barrier and start interrupting this process. So, if you've ever heard people talk about blackouts or passing out, so a blackout is different than a passing out. So, passing out, people, they've had so much alcohol, their body is just shut down. They appear to be asleep. They're not going to respond to you when you touch them or shake them or, try to talk to them. A blackout, though, is when this process is interrupted. You're not making new memories, but you might still be fully functioning. So, especially people who drink a lot often, sometimes, like the wives of alcoholics have said that they don't even notice when their spouse is in the middle of a blackout. They don't know, like they're not stumbling around, they're not slurring their speech. But later on they're like, well, I don't remember any of that, the person who was drunk, because they've stopped rehearsing and moving things into their memory. So this becomes a problem in forensics because when you're in that situation, you're not conscious of what you're doing, you're not thinking about the repercussions of your actions. You might tend to do things that are risky, like drive, have sex. You might perform all kinds of risky behaviors that might lead to permanent harm or even death. So people might do things like, let's say for sexual assault, for example. If you were in this, say you said, yes, I want to have sex with this person, but you were in blackout phase. So the next day you don't remember ever saying that. You just know that you had sex with this person. Then it gets into that real area of, hey, did I consent to this? I don't remember consenting to that. Was this a crime or not? So again, when you go off to college, you need to be real careful how much you drink. You don't want to be in that phase where you don't remember the things you did the day before. All right. So, a little side there. Um, so go ahead and take a second just to read this paragraph. Now, did you notice that almost everything in this is spelled wrong? There aren't many real words in here. But you still probably read, according to a research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place. So even though all of these words were all just a mess and jumble, you were still able to read it because your brain said, well, this is what I think it should be. So our brains can influence our perception. We try to make sense of things. Our brains will fill in details so that the world makes sense. This is why magic shows work, right? We are like, oh, that is what should have happened. So we taste, we hear, we smell things, we feel things. But after an event, we can believe that things were part of the background, even though they actually were not. So in reading those sentences, even if a word is missing, sometimes you'll fill it in. This is why I'm a terrible proofreader, because my brain just fills in the missing words or what it should be. So our brains are going to play tricks on us. Here's some pictures of examples. So, do you see a fingerprint here? Did you see a dog? Do you see a face? Do you see a liar? This one, you can't, this logically just doesn't make any sense. There's no way that that could, really physically be a real thing. Why does my brain tell me it's okay? So let's work on our observation skills. If we look at a picture like this, we might say, well, how many people are here? Are they female? Are they male? What are they wearing? What are they doing? They all seem to be kind of dressed a certain way. What do I think they're dressed this way for? Um, what is this house in the back? Where does it look like they are? I can try and put that together and see. But our brains are always playing tricks on us too. So in this one, another little visual here, you might see things moving, but then when you look at them, they're actually not moving. So witnesses are key to any crime investigation. If you have a witness, by all means, you want to interview them, right? But because our brains kind of fill in blanks for us, witnesses can't always be trusted to have remembered everything correctly. They could be right or they could be wrong, or it could be a mixture. So, how we deal with witnesses is really, really, really important. So, first of all, things that can affect their observation skills. What's their emotional state? Are they upset? Were they calm when it happened? Were they depressed? All those things. Were they alone or in a group of people? How many people or animals were around? Type of activity was going on around you? How much activity was going on? All of these things can make your reliability come into question. So let's look at a few of them here. So level of interest. Maybe you just aren't paying attention. If you've had a friend say, "Did you just see that?" And you're like, "I don't know. I wasn't paying attention." Stress can affect it. Concentration. The amount and kind of distractions. So there's a lot of things going on in the room. I don't know. I don't notice it. Prejudices. We all have prejudices. Those things can come into play too. Personal beliefs. If you believe that, it's always the husband, then that's going to be a problem, right? Motives. You might have a reason to want one thing to be the answer, then not, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what happened. Lapse in time. So it is really important that you get to eyewitnesses as soon as possible after the event happened. So, eyewitness testimony. When we're looking at eyewitnesses, you have to be able to distinguish between fact and opinion. So, this is really, really, really important. Fact is something that can be verified, is absolutely true, can be proven, versus your opinion. So often we think we see what really happened. What we think we see and what really happened might differ. So I think I saw this happen, but maybe it was my brain just filling in some gaps, right? The act of someone fleeing from the site of a shooting. I might think, oh, you must be guilty if you're running away. Or you could be an innocent bystander running away, right? Because you're afraid you're going to be shot. So, witnesses, you have to examine them very carefully. First thing to do, separate them so they're not influencing each other's testimony. When you ask a question, you don't want a leading question. Like, you don't want to say, did they have brown hair? You want to say, what color was their hair, right? Because just the fact that you said brown hair might get them thinking, yeah, I think it was kind of brown, when really they might have said blonde if you hadn't said that. So, we want the evidence, the facts, not their opinion. So, on the completion of the examination, then you start putting the facts together to try to make a logical pattern what happened and recreate the crime. If you have a lot of witnesses and you interview them separately and they all give different accounts of the color of the hair of the person, then you don't know what the color of the hair of the person was. But if every single witness says, oh, they have brown hair, then maybe you can say, okay, that seems like a reasonable conclusion. That person has brown hair. Um, Eyewitnesses are incredibly effective at swaying a jury. You know, if you are a witness who is saying, "Yeah, this I saw this person do this," you know, that's usually a really big thing for a jury. You go, "Oh, well, there's a person saying right there that they saw it," and it doesn't just because they're not right doesn't mean that they're lying intentionally. That witness might have convinced themselves that this is the truth. There's a thing called the Innocence Project. And what they do is they go back and look at cases where people have always maintained their innocence that happened before DNA evidence could ever be tested. So, you know, before the 80s and 90s, people gathered this evidence, but we didn't know what DNA was. So now they'll take that old evidence, run the DNA on it, and try to prove guilt or innocence on some of these people. So, for example, there's an example in your book about a man who was accused of killing a child. I want to say 8 or 9 year old. Now there were no witnesses, no direct witnesses there. There was no evidence that linked him to the crime at all. But there was one witness in the courtroom that said that she thought that this man had done it, and it convinced the court or the jury. They found him guilty, put him in prison, and years later, the witness recanted and said, I was sort of pressured by the police to say this. So it wasn't real. I don't really think he was the person. But they didn't get him out of prison until this Innocence Project came along and the DNA evidence showed it wasn't. So 87% of the wrongful convictions that they have found were people who were put in prison by eyewitness testimony. So eyewitnesses are good, but you have to make sure you're questioning them properly. They're not pressured into anything, and they trust what they say, or what they say lines up with the evidence too. So, first of all, let's look at how to be a good observer. First of all, you need to be systematic. So, you need to slowly go over everything in the crime scene. Look carefully at each detail and each piece of evidence, and don't assume that you're going to remember anything. So, you put everything into a notebook, you document it. Turn off all your filters. So, that part of your brain that says, oh, this stuff isn't important. You want to pay attention to everything. Everything is potentially important. Collect information first, interpret it later. So, again, this comes back to those prejudices that we all have. So, if you walk in and a wife has been murdered, a woman's been murdered, and you're like, oh, usually it's the husband. I'm going to start looking for things that tie the husband to this, right? You might overlook a piece of evidence that ties somebody else to it. So you want to keep those prejudices out of the way, look for patterns, make connections. The more evidence you have, the better connections you can make later. And document everything. So back when I used to work in research, they're like, if it's not in your lab notebook, it didn't happen. If you didn't record it, it didn't happen. So if you don't have a photograph of the thing at the crime scene, if you haven't documented everything there, it's not going to be accepted in court. So everything has to be documented, especially in forensics, just so lawyers can not tear it all apart in court. And remember, our brains tend to fill in gaps and perceptions, and our memories are just as faulty as everybody else's. So document it down. So forensic scientists are going to be trained to be good observers. They're going to find clues in ordinary details, then work backwards to try and deduce, hey, what are the actual facts of the case? Use reasoning. And again, solving a crime depends on lots of evidence, taking that evidence, analyzing it, and it's going to require patience and practice. So, we're going to do a little activity here. So, this is your work for the day. And what I want you to do is take a sheet of paper. So, take a minute, get a sheet of paper, hit pause if you need to. You're going to write your answers on this sheet of paper. So, I'm going to show you a picture for 15 seconds. Then I'm going to show you some questions. You're going to answer the questions to the best of your ability. Don't go backwards, don't rewind. Just answer what you can. This is not about your grade is not based on how many you got right. Okay? It's based on did you try. So, here we go. Ready? First one. Okay, now pause the video a minute, take a minute to answer these questions, then go back, or I'll go back and you can look at the picture and write down how many you got right. So put an answer for them all, then go back and say you got 3 out of 7 right. You write 3 out of 7. So pause here while you answer. Okay, let's go back and look at the picture now. So you can see how many you got right. Did you see the Glenville Municipal Center? These are the offices. How many cars? How many trees? These flowers would sort of say, oh, it's probably spring. You know, little tulips. Don't see any people. Okay, let's try another one. So write down how many did you get right out of the 7. Okay, let's try another one. So 15 seconds to look at this picture. Okay, now here's the question. So you can pause, write down your answers for picture 2, and then when you restart, I'll show you the answers. Okay, so if you've restarted, now you can go back, see how many questions you got right. Blue, vase-like shape, what did it look like? The designs look like, the colors. Size is an interesting question. Is this just a really big chair, maybe? I don't know. Okay, so write down how many you got right. Let's try one more. Okay, so again, pause this, and then you can answer as many questions as you can. Go back and see how well you did on your observation skills. We'll do some more observing tomorrow when you get done with this one. I'll click back. You can look at the picture again, and then take a picture of your notebook and turn it in through your Google Classroom. And I will talk to you later.